If we're being honest, Brenden, they should have put away most of those games the way they did yesterday.
Should not have split. Not against the Rockies, not at home. Did you know the Rockies coming into the weekend were one of two teams with a single-digit win total on the road this year? Not anymore, but they were.
Took a couple, didn't they? Yeah.
They did. They went from 8 wins to 10 on the road, and that's not, again, treading water, but these are not the types of teams the Cardinals should be treading water against.
No, it's time to push forward if you're the Cardinals with the spot that they're in. They'll have a chance to do it this week, but tell us your thoughts about the disappointing series for the Cardinals this weekend at 875-KTGR. We'll also talk about the Royals, who had a good weekend. Yesterday, fell a little bit short, but, I mean, time and again, we're seeing this more and more now. The Royals, in the ninth inning or later, they're the best offense in baseball. I just buy the numbers. Sheer OPS. That's what they are. And they showed that again this weekend in a couple of examples. We'll talk about that coming up at 5:05. Big news in college hoops. Dan Hurley's staying. You heard it in the National Sports Center. We'll talk about the effects of that coming up at 4:25. And a whole lot of talk around Caitlin Clark missing Team USA's Olympic roster for the women's basketball team. We'll get our thoughts on that at 5:25 and whether she should have been left off or whether it was the wrong decision by USA Basketball. 875-KTGR to call or text us. You can tweet us, too, at KTGR Big Show. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/KTGR Big Show.
Now, the Big Show's Big Deal.
Well, good on the Cardinals at least for getting a series split. It could have been even worse if they had lost yesterday, but they didn't. Andre Palante had 5 scoreless innings, only allowing 3 hits, earning his second big league win of the season. And Alec Burleson with a solo home run, his 4th homer in the last 8 games, as the Cardinals won 5-1 yesterday over the Rockies to improve to 31-33 on the season. They are 6.5 back of first place in the NL Central, as they have an off day today, and they'll take on the Pittsburgh Pirates for 3 games, starting tomorrow night with Pittsburgh throwing the dynamic Paul Skeens, the rookie for Pittsburgh, on the mound tomorrow night, which you can hear on KTGR. The Royals lost yesterday in extra innings 6-5, despite a comeback to bring it to extras. Valiant effort in the bottom of the 10th inning to try and tie it again, but couldn't do so against the Mariners. They still win 2 out of 3, and that's the Big Show's Big Deal on this 10th day of June 2024. 875-KTGR to call or text us here on the show. So a lot to get to today, but we'll start with the Cardinals getting a couple of wins when, frankly, they should have gotten at least 3 in this one. And they set themselves on the wrong foot by losing Thursday's game when they really shouldn't have. And this is the result. You can't have too many more series like this, Brenden. It just can't happen if the Cardinals are going to go anywhere.
Look, and I mean, there's a lot of time left, but what it kind of means is when you don't take advantage of the obvious spots on the schedule to make your run and to get to 500 and get to above 500, when the schedule presents these chances and you don't take advantage of them, what it ends up meaning is that somewhere along the way, the expectation becomes you have to sweep another Orioles-type team. When under normal circumstances, you'd be thrilled for a 2 out of 3 against a club like Baltimore. Remember, the Cardinals swept Baltimore. Those types of things don't happen all too often, but they're going to almost have to be part of the norm and the expectation down the stretch if the Cardinals don't manage the easier portion of the schedule that they have coming up, I guess I would say, but they're in the middle of it. We can look ahead to the schedule and say, hey, you've got 4 teams coming up in a row with losing records, and you play the Braves, and then you get 3 more teams with losing records. The Cardinals only have 5 scheduled games as of today between now and the All-Star break against teams with winning records. The Braves are 3 of those games. The Kansas City Royals are the other 2. But that doesn't really do a lot for me, Andy, when they can take on a team like the Rockies this weekend and not pick up any ground. You can play all the losing teams you want, but if you don't beat them, you're not going to make your charge, and then that's going to leave the end of the season, which I imagine is going to be a little tougher than the next month or so, because how could it not be? You're going to have to win more of those games, and it's not going to fly when at the end of the season the Cardinals are piddling around 500, and they say, well, it's really hard to win a series against Team XYZ. Yeah, but that's what you're going to force upon yourself if you don't beat these teams right now. That's really what the Cardinals are setting the table for.
It's tough because the Rockies were not a daunting team by any means, and with the way the Cardinals set themselves up, I mean, I guess Saturday's game is maybe the one that stings the most because you're looking at a lead going into the 7th, and you have your triumvirate, if you will, set up to maybe protect the lead, but they end up not getting it done. Like Kittredge just couldn't hold the lead there in his spot in the 7th. But that happens. Again, we've talked about it. It happens throughout the season. But if you allow too many of those games to sink your series or sink your momentum, then it's going to be a lot more hurtful as opposed to the teams that have similar setups to their bullpen, and every once in a while they blow it. But they have the cushion to be able to work with. Say, all right, it happens, it's baseball, and we can move on to the next one. Cardinals can't, they don't have that luxury. They just don't. And they have to make sure that against teams like the Rockies, who are one of the worst baseball teams and organizations right now in Major League Baseball, like, you can't allow it. It's not something that a winning team does. And look, the Cardinals still have time to change my mind on that, but I have been very skeptical of their emergence still from where they were 7-8 games under 500, and they're trying to make sure they stay afloat there. I think on paper they're good enough to do it, but it's just not connecting all at one time, especially against teams like this where you have to make up ground.
Like, you went and treaded water for 4 games against one of the worst teams in baseball. They are just a little bit better by winning percentage than the Marlins at this point, like a half a game better. But this was one that you really needed to clean up 3 or 4, because the premise was Andy coming into the homestand 5 of 7 between the games against the Rockies and then the upcoming series against Pittsburgh. 5 of 7. That needed to be the expectation. Anything better than that,
yes,
would have been gravy, right? But now what you've set up is you have to sweep the Pirates in order to achieve that 5 out of 7. And this is going to be, Andy, this might be a tough series to just win for the Cardinals because, A, the Pirates aren't, as bad as when we think in our head, Pittsburgh Pirates. They're a half game behind the Cardinals coming into this series. The Cardinals could easily leave St. Louis after 3 with the Pittsburgh Pirates and be in last place in the NL Central. It would not be hard to envision, and dropping 2 of 3 would create that scenario. And, by the way, right off the bat, you got to face Paul Skeens. I mean, that is not an easy assignment. Mitch Keller is going to go on Thursday for Pittsburgh. You avoid Jared Jones, which is fortunate because he's another good arm for that Pirate rotation. But, Andy, the Cardinals shouldn't be favored. Jurisdiction of legality, whatever. They shouldn't be favored in a game against Paul Skeens right now. It's nothing on Miles Michaelis, who's going to start for the Cardinals tomorrow, but Skeens is like legit. And It's crazy the Pirates took as long as they did to call him up. But if I'm just imagining one game, and we don't really think of it in these terms, we look at NFL schedules that way and college football schedules that way, but going into this game, don't you feel like the Pirates are almost more likely to win it than the Cardinals just because of the pitching matchup? So how are you sweeping this series when you're probably not in line to win the first one?
I can't see this offense figuring it out against that type of velocity. Like, come on. That's what you're going up against. You're going up against 101 consistently. A guy who's throwing 101 in these types of games. And look, the Cardinals offense, I think they had some pretty good moments throughout the weekend, but it still wasn't enough. At least early enough, they couldn't at least, except for yesterday, they finally got an early lead and added enough runs to be able to not use Helsley and JoJo for the later innings. You get to save them. But, yeah, I mean, when you go the first 5 innings against the Rockies pitcher who was it, Feltner, came in with an ERA around 6. And eventually, I think he gave up some runs, but they were all unearned. So, like, he lowered his ERA, even though he gave up 4 runs over the weekend on Saturday.
Yeah, this was the Feltner game was Saturday.
Yeah,
and when you mentioned the Cardinals had good moments over the weekend, I would agree with that assessment. They did not have a good weekend offensively, though. They had good moments, but not a good weekend.
Right.
For me, that game, that performance against Feltner on Saturday was one of the lowest moments of the Cardinals season offensively, because Feltner was a 6.22 ERA coming into that game, and he had a day where, if not for Elaris Montero throwing a ball into left field, in the sixth inning and plating 3 runs on that one play, the Cardinals would have looked even more embarrassing offensively with what they had. And then I think it was Arenado that drove in the runner that ended up advancing another base. So, like, those 4 runs were all unearned. The fact that against a guy with a 6.2 ERA coming into the game ended up basically shoving Andy. He went 5 1/3 with 7 Ks.
7 strikeouts.
And no earned runs. They got 2 hits off this dude. So there were moments, Alec Burleson hitting homers. Matt Carpenter had a long home run to center field. They had some moments over the weekend, fair to say. But all in all, I don't care about really the run total, because you're gonna have those 4 runs from that moment in the 6th inning on Saturday added to the scoring, and it's gonna make it look less bad than it was. It was bad. Like the approach against Feltner is one of that's embarrassing. I hate to put a guy like Feltner out to dry and basically say, this guy stinks, why didn't you get him? But you know what, Andy? He's probably not listening to the Big Show.
He stinks.
So I'm just going to go ahead and say it. This guy is someone they should have absolutely beaten to hell. And the fact that they didn't get an earned run against him, and if it's not for Alaris Montero, who, it's kind of funny, came over to Colorado in that Arenado deal, and they moved him from third base originally when he was a prospect to first base, and I guess that's why they moved him. That throw was unbelievable. And it happened all weekend. Any ground ball hit to the right side that they were either team was trying to turn double play on, it was probably going into left field. It happened. Gorman did it once or twice. The Rockies did it a couple of times. The second time the Rockies did it, it didn't go into left field, but then the shortstop threw it into the dugout basically to score a run for the Cardinals. The Rockies made so many defensive mistakes. For the Cardinals not to come away with at least 3 or 4 in this series it's bad, man. And Saturday was a wild one, and that's the one, as you said, that stings the most, because they literally handed you 3 runs on one play and effectively 4, because all it took was an Arenado base knock to get that 4th one. And the fact that the Cardinals didn't win, don't put that on Andrew Kittredge, who is going to be human sometimes and give up a lead. It's going to happen. He's not going to end the year with a 0.0 ERA, just like the others in the bullpen aren't. Largely, it was a very good weekend by the Cardinal bullpen. Games 1, 2, and 4 locked it down, and it wasn't always the mainstays that you think about as being reliable. It was a very productive weekend. I think outside of that Kittredge inning, the bullpen allowed 2 runs over the weekend and something like 13 innings total. So it was a very productive weekend for the bullpen. But, Andy, I'm still going to kind of put it on the offense, because even though the run totals in some of these games weren't so bad, if you look throughout the games, I think 3 of the 4 with RISP was once again just a nightmare. Mm-hmm. Even yesterday, 5-1, easy win. Finally, it was very low stress, which should have been the way this whole weekend went. But even with that, winning 5-1, I think they went 1 for 7 with runners in scoring position. They're hitting .215 with RISP on the season. That is 28th in baseball, if I'm not mistaken.
Great. Other than that, everything's fine with the offense. Just great. Love it.
They shouldn't feel good. They shouldn't even feel tolerable
hilarious
with this split.
The play was hilarious, yes.
Which one? The Montero play?
The Montero play, and also the Mrs. Lincoln play, which I think what Andy was striving for with that. Besides that, everything's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'm with you.
Other than
I'm with
that,
you.
Everything was fine. Yeah.
I'm just too mad to pick up on it, I think, right now.
Man.
I'm mad on their behalf. I'm mad on your behalf, Cardinals fans. What do I care? It doesn't matter to me. But, this should not have happened that way.
Yeah.
And, if you don't think this team's a little bit on edge, that Saturday afternoon postgame was, from the word go, Ollie Marmol was feisty, man. And there were some moments in that where I thought that's not a good look for the Cardinal manager, because a lot of the points that were being raised by reporters, and he may have taken umbrage with the phrasing of some of the questions, but the premise is pretty much spot on, that this team has not played consistently clean baseball. The offense has not been driven by the dudes in the middle that need to drive the offense most often. And there are a lot of questions as to, all right, if it wasn't going to happen this weekend against the Rockies, when's it coming for the Cardinals? They're going to have to wake up in some of these areas and get back to playing better fundamental baseball. We saw some examples of it on Sunday. But, Andy, Ivan Herrera, not a good weekend behind the plate. Really struggled, and I'm not, and the same as Ollie said after the game Saturday, doesn't want to harp on the kid, and I get that. But the more, every day they put him behind the plate, it is basically free reign for the opposing offense. You get a guy on first base, he's going. And I think every game he started was multiple stolen bases. One of them a throwing error into center field on a walk. I mean, the guy was getting the base anyway, didn't need to throw. All he didn't like the fact that it was discussed about their attention to detail. He took umbrage with that phrasing on Saturday. But Andy, that's an attention to detail play that Herrera's got to understand. It's a walk, man. You don't throw it. You don't take that risk. There's nothing to gain from it. So it's those things that they got away from the Cardinals this weekend. I know they ended it on a win, Andy, but we haven't had a big show since 3 of those games were played, and it feels like this weekend was not enough. We're not going to come in here and go, well, they split. They're still doing okay. They're around 500. They had to win this series, and how are they going to respond now? Because Pittsburgh's coming, and they don't want to be in last place any more than the Cardinals do, and they got Paul Skeens going on Tuesday. So it's go time, but is it going to be all that easy to go this week against the Pittsburgh Pirates? I don't know.
875-KTGR, if you want to call or text us with your thoughts on the Cardinals after a series split against the Colorado Rockies. It's not what you want, but tell us what your thoughts are at 875-KTGR.
They beat the Phillies, in a series earlier this year.
The Rockies did?
Yes, they did.
Okay, I don't care.
See?
I don't care.
You know what, though? The Phillies have, aside from losing that series to Colorado, won all their games. Yes. Philadelphia is on top of the world. That. It's just like,
they can afford to lose a couple of series to some of those bad teams. Yep.
Some teams can afford that because they're taking care of business elsewhere. It's a blip on their radar. But for the Cardinals, and they didn't lose the series to the Rockies, I get it, but they didn't do enough. They should be sitting at 500 today instead of 2 games below. And they're lucky of one thing, Andy. You look at that NL wild card, it's even crazier than I think it was before we went to the weekend break.
It's a mess. It is an absolute mess.
The Padres are a game under 500 in the second wild card spot. The third wild card spot currently in the NL is a tie between 3 teams that are at 32 and 34. And the Cardinals are technically a percentage point behind that because they played 2 fewer games, also at 2 games below 500 at 31 and 33. That's 4 teams vying for 1 spot, but the Padres are attainable as well because they're only like a half game or whatever the math is. They played a weird, wonky number of games compared to everybody else ahead of that third wild card team. And then behind the Cardinals, you've got the Pirates by a half a game, and you've got the Nationals by like a 1-game differential. I think you got 8 teams within 2 games of one another for 2 spots right now in the NL. So the Cardinals are lucky for that because there should be urgency to say, let's cut away from this mess and build a roster here, make a couple of moves here and there, and say it is go time. But the fact that the Cardinals haven't made their move yet, they're not out of it. But John Mozeliak needs to start. I think a trade is needed in June, Andy. I really do. I don't know if it's like urgency. Last year sucked. You wanted the fans to be patient, and then you at the deadline traded away assets, which made sense at the time. But now you're in another season where it's kind of just muddling along, and you want patience still. But you know what? I think there's got to be some urgency to recognize where the needs are and try to fill them. And it's interesting. Mozeliak talked to some Cardinal bloggers and podcasters over the weekend, Andy. The Cardinals every year hold Blogger Day at Busch where they invite folks from the blog and podcasting community, and he always has a media availability where it's like a Q&A session, which is really cool. It's the first such session that's been held since opening day. Because as I thought, Andy, that they might be doing, first game of a homestand, Mozeliak would probably be talking to reporters, and we see injury updates every time, right? Yeah. Whatever it was on Thursday afternoon, I think I even read some of them off of the assembled reporters at Busch Stadium that gave the injury updates. Andy, I just assumed that Mozeliak was the one giving those, but it's actually been Ollie Marmol, and I should have checked into this sooner. But I saw Jeff Jones tweet about it over the weekend after the Blogger Day and said that's the first time he's met publicly with a group of, media in public in terms of like a group media scrum. Sure. Every other time that Mo has spoken, it's been a one-on-one with a TV station or a radio station or writer, a writer with a private whatever. And so I didn't even know it, but so that's the first time he's like in a forum that's public and going to be live, and that's really the only time it's happened. But to Mo's credit, he did say during that the Cardinals are not going to be among the teams that are looking to sell off at the deadline. He said, we're getting to the point where teams are going to realize that maybe selling off is what's best for them, but we're not among those teams. We will be looking to add, and he cited a starter that could give him some innings and maybe a right-handed hitting center fielder as possibilities there. But it's easy to talk about it. I think the Cardinals need to go out and do it as well.
Here's the thing, though. I hope he's right. I hope that is, in fact, the case. But that decision can change for you if you don't act and try to make sure the team's improved enough to even, stay afloat in this race, and B, as you were mentioning, try to cut from the pack somehow, some way. So that way the decision is much easier for you. So like you're maybe in the second wild card spot and you maybe have, a 1.5, 2 game lead. It doesn't have to be much, but I mean that it's going to take a lot of work in order to get in front of so many of those teams there when there is such a logjam and you have to monitor so many different situations. Who's winning here? Who's winning there? Like it is hard to lead that pack at this point in time, especially if you are not looking right now at your roster and saying, yeah, that's not good enough. We need to do it now or else we're going to lose our chance to essentially rise up from this pack.
Because you're 2 games under 500 right now and you're right in the thick of it. But what happens if you suddenly lose 5 in a row? Which I'm not saying they're going to.
Right.
But if you do that, you're the Mets now. And we're not talking about the Mets as a playoff team because they're like 8, 9 games under, and we kind of feel like they're out of it. That can happen within a series and a half if things go the wrong way. So to have the reinforcements available to you sooner rather than later, I think would make sense for the Cardinals. And if they're already mentally committed to doing it, why not do it sooner? Why not go out and try and swing one of those deals in the month of June, ideally within the next couple of weeks, whether it happens or not? But that's sort of where the Cardinals' mindset is, at least as described by Mozeliak publicly. He said, we are sort of in that shop mode on how we can look to get better, even if they're just small wins, which I think a lot of us would agree that while they maybe need a number 5 starter, we can get into at some point more on our thoughts on Andre Pallante, who did a very nice job yesterday, but has been inconsistent. Is it a case where what they need is a 1B to Sonny Gray's 1A? Like, you need a number 5, but that number 5 needs to almost be Lance Lynn or Miles Michaelis.
Right, slide everybody down. Right.
You're sliding everybody back. Kyle Gibson's your 3, and you get a bona fide number 2. Then we're talking about a rotation that I think has some juice, not only to get you to October, but maybe roll the dice a little bit and say, we got a shot with Sonny Gray and insert mystery guest here, and then Kyle Gibson in a game 3 if you need him. Suddenly, I think you're a little bit more viable, but it sounds like Mo is talking about small wins, but small wins are better than no wins in terms of pursuits at the deadline. So I should think that they would be looking to make some moves and come up with something that can help this team, because I do think they owe it to the fan base that they have asked for patience. Can that patience be rewarded at some point? And I think that point should be right now. If you don't make the playoffs, you don't make it, but they should be doing their level best to get one of those wild card spots at a minimum.
What should the Cardinals do now after a series split with the Rockies over the weekend? 875-KTGR to call or text us. No game for the Cardinals today. They're back at it tomorrow against Paul Skeens and the Pirates to start a 3-game set at Busch Stadium to close out that homestand. Lot to maybe, I don't know if there's a lot on the line here for both teams, but the vibes certainly are. I mean, both these teams are trying to catapult themselves up into that next pack, and that's essentially what this series could do for either of them.
Yeah, and again, we don't want to make too much of June baseball and act like the season would be over if the Cardinals don't have the intended outcome in some of these series, but I'm going to keep using the framing that by not taking care of your business now against weaker competition, you are setting yourselves up to need more out of series later in the year. That more is going to be very difficult to come by, but it will turn into the expectation, and you won't be able to fall back on, well, it's really hard to win these types of series against contending teams. No. That's what you're setting up by right now not taking care of the weaker competition on your schedule.